All right, we're going to continue in our book reading, Augustine, The City of God Against the Pagans, edited by R.W. Dyson. I just want you to remember that this book was written in the late 300s, and we are beginning in book 4 this evening. Chapter 1 of the matters discussed in the first book. When I began to speak of the city of God, I thought it necessary, first of all, to answer its enemies who pursue earthly joys, and long only for fleeting things. They rail against the Christian religion, which is the one saving and true religion, for whatever sorrows they suffer in respect of these things. And they do this even though they suffer rather through the mercy of God in admonishing them than from his severity in punishing. Among those enemies, there are many ignorant men whose hatred of us is all the more grievously inflamed by the authority of the learned. For the former believe that the extraordinary events which have occurred in our own day did not occur at all in times gone by, and they are supported in this belief even by those who know it to be false, but who conceal their knowledge in order to seem to have just cause for murmuring against us. It was necessary, therefore, to demonstrate from the books in which their own authors have recorded and published the history of times gone by are far other than the ignorant suppose. At the same time, it was necessary to teach that the false gods, whom once they worshipped openly and still worship in secret, are most vile spirits and malignant and deceitful demons, so much so that they take delight in crimes which, whether real or fictitious, are none the less their own, and which they have desired to have celebrated for them at their own festivals. For human infirmity cannot be restrained from the perpetration of damnable deeds for as long as a seemingly divine authority is given to the imitation of such deeds. In showing these things, I have not relied upon mere conjecture. I have drawn partly upon my own recent memory, for I have myself witnessed such spectacles as are exhibited to these deities, and partly upon the writings of those who have left accounts of these matters to posterity, not as a reproach to their gods, but in their honor. Varro, who is esteemed among our adversaries as a most learned man and the weightiest of authorities, is a case in point. He compiled separate books concerning things human, and maketh his son. Oh, wait a minute. I think I skipped a page by accident. Yeah, there we go. Concerning things human and things divine, assigning some books to the human and some to the divine, according to the dignity of each. And he placed theatrical displays not among things human, but among the divine. In parentheses, he has, although if there had been none but good and honorable men in the city, theatrical displays could have had no rightful place even among things human. In doing this, he did not rely merely on his own authority. Rather, being born and educated in Rome, he found such displays already established among things divine. At the end of the first book, I briefly set down the matters which were to be discussed next. Then, in the two books which followed, I discussed some of them. I see, therefore, that I must now pay the remainder of my debt to satisfy the expectation of my readers. Chapter 2. Of those things which are contained in the second and third books. I undertook to say something against those who attribute to our religion the disasters lately sustained by the Roman Commonwealth. I promised also that I should recall the evils, as many of them and as great as I could remember, or as might seem sufficient, which the city of Rome, or the provinces belonging to her empire, suffered even before it was forbidden to sacrifice to demons. For the Romans would no doubt have attributed all such evils to us if our religion had by then shone upon them, or had already prohibited the sacrilegious reign of the demons. These things, I think, I have disposed of satisfactorily in the second and third books. In the second, I dealt with moral evils which are to be regarded either as the only evils or as the greatest evils. In the third, I dealt with those evils which only fools dread to suffer, namely, those of the body and of external things, to which good men also are commonly subject. But our adversaries accept moral evils, evils by which they are themselves made evil, not only patiently, but even with pleasure. Yet how few of the incidents in the history of that one city and her empire have I mentioned? Not even all of them down to the time of Augustus Caesar. What if I had resolved to recall and enlarge upon not those evils which men do to one another, but those which befall the earth from the elements of the universe itself? Apuleius briefly touches these things in one part of the book which he wrote called De Mundo, saying that all earthly things are subject to change, overthrow, and destruction. For indeed, to use his own words, quote, by violent tremors of the earth, the ground has opened and swallowed up cities with their peoples. Whole regions have been washed away by sudden deluges. Those also which had formerly been continents have been made into islands by the coming of strange floods, and others have been made accessible on foot by the withdrawing of the sea. Cities have been overthrown by wind and storm. Fires have erupted from the clouds, by which regions of the east have been consumed and have perished. And on western coasts, the same devastations have been wrought by the bursting forth of waters and floods. So also, rivers of fire, kindled by the gods, once flowed from the craters on Etna's summit and poured down the slopes like torrents. Unquote. If I had wished to collect historical examples of this kind from wherever I could, when would I have finished? Yet all these things came to pass in the times before the name of Christ had suppressed those rites of the Romans, so vain and inimical to true salvation. I promised also that I would show what the morals of the Romans were, and for what reason the true God, in whose power are all kingdoms, is designed to help them increase their empire. I promised to show how little help they received from those whom they esteemed as gods, and how much harm those gods did instead by their deceit and falsehood. I see, then, that I must now speak of these things, and especially of the growth of the Roman Empire. For I have already said much, especially in the second book, of the poisonous deceit of the demons, whom the Romans worshipped as gods, and of the great damage that those demons did to their morals. In all three of the books now completed, however, I have also shown, whenever opportunity arose, how much solace God has granted to good and evil men alike, even in the midst of the evils of war, through the name of Christ, to which the barbarians paid such great honor beyond the custom of war. In this way he maketh his sun to rise on the good and on the evil, and giveth rain to the just and to the unjust. Chapter 3. And that was in Matthew chapter 5, verse 45. Whether so abroad an empire, when acquired only by warfare, should be counted among the good things of the wise or happy. Let us now see, therefore, how it is that our adversaries venture to attribute the great breadth and duration of the Roman Empire to the gods, to those gods whom they claim to have worshipped with honor, even when their service consisted of vile games and the ministry of vile men. First, however, I should like to devote a little time to the following question. Is it wise or prudent to wish to glory in the breadth and magnitude of an empire when you cannot show that the men whose empire it is are happy? For the Romans always lived in dark fear and cruel lust, surrounded by the disasters of war and the shedding of blood, which, whether that of fellow citizens or enemies, was human nonetheless. The joy of such men may be compared to the fragile splendor of glass. They are horribly afraid lest it be suddenly shattered. That this may be understood more clearly, let us not allow ourselves to be swayed by idle bombast. Let us not allow the edge of our attention to be dulled by the splendid names of things when we hear of peoples, kingdoms, and provinces. Instead, let us imagine two men, for each individual man, like one letter in a text, is, as it were, an element of the city or kingdom, no matter how extensive it is in its occupation of the earth. Let us suppose one of these men to be poor, or at any rate of moderate means, and the other to be very wealthy. The wealthy man, however, is troubled by fears. He pines with grief. He burns with greed. He is never secure. He is always unquiet and panting from endless confrontations with his enemies. To be sure, he adds to his patrimony an immense measure of these miseries, but alongside these additions, he also heaps up the most bitter cares. By contrast, the man of moderate means is self-sufficient on his small and circumscribed estate. He is beloved of his own family and rejoices in the most sweet peace with kindred, neighbors, and friends. He is devotedly religious, well disposed in mind, healthy in body, frugal in life, chaste in morals, untroubled in conscience. I do not know if anyone could be such a fool as to dare to doubt which to prefer. As, therefore, in the case of these two men, so in two families, two peoples, two kingdoms, the same principle of tranquility applies. And if we use this principle vigilantly to guide our search, we shall very easily see where vanity dwells and where happiness lies. It is beneficial, then, that good men should rule far and wide and long, worshiping the true God and serving him with true rights and good morals. Nor is this so much beneficial to them as to those over whom they rule. For as far as they themselves are concerned, their godliness and probity, which are great gifts of God, suffice to bring them the true felicity through which this life may be well spent and eternal life received hereafter. In this world, therefore, the rule of good men is of profit, not so much to themselves as to human affairs. The reign of the wicked, however, does injury only to those who rule, for they lay waste their own souls by their greater license in wickedness, whereas those who are placed under them in servitude are not harmed except by their own iniquity. For whatever evils are inflicted upon just men by unjust masters are not the punishment of crime, but the test of virtue. Therefore, the good man is free even if he is a slave, whereas the bad man is a slave even if he reigns. A slave, not to one man, but what is worse, to as many masters as he has vices. When divine scripture speaks of these vices, it says, "For of whom any man is overcome, to the same he is also the bond slave." Chapter 4. How like kingdoms without justice are to bands of robbers. Justice removed, then, what are kingdoms but great bands of robbers? What are bands of robbers themselves but little kingdoms? The band itself is made up of men. It is governed by the authority of a ruler. It is bound together by a pact of association. And the loot, when I gotta turn it, is divided according to an agreed law. If, by the constant addition of desperate men, this scourge grows to such a size that it acquires territory, establishes a seat of government, occupies city and subjugates people, it assumes the name of kingdom more openly, for this name is now manifestly conferred upon it not by the removal of greed, but by the addition of impunity. It was a pertinent and true answer which was made to Alexander the Great by a pirate whom he had seized. When the king asked him what he meant by infesting the sea, the pirate defiantly replied, "The same as you do when you infest the whole world. But because I do it with a little ship, I am called a robber. And because you do it with a great fleet, you are an emperor." Chapter 5. Of the revolt of the gladiators, whose power came to resemble the dignity of kings. I here refrain from asking what sort of men that they were that Romulus gathered together, for great care was taken in their case to ensure that, when they were removed from the life that they had led and received into the fellowship of the city, they should cease to dwell on the punishments due to them. Henceforth, therefore, they became more peaceful participants in human affairs, for it was the fear of such punishments which had driven them to ever greater crimes. I say this, however, that the Roman Empire itself, which had already grown great by subjugating many peoples, and which was an object of terror to the rest, was itself bitterly injured, gravely alarmed, and with no small effort avoided a disastrous reversal when a very small number of gladiators, fleeing from the games in Campania, assembled a large army, appointed 3 generals, and laid waste the whole breadth of Italy with the utmost cruelty. Let our adversaries tell us what gods helped those men to rise from a small and inconsiderable band of robbers to a kingdom that the Romans, for all their great forces and fortresses, were obliged to fear. Or will they deny that the gladiators received divine assistance because they did not remain in power for long? As if, however, the life of any man were long, according to the reasoning, the gods help no one to rule. For every man dies in a little while, nor is that to be deemed a benefit which vanishes like a mist in a moment of time for every man, and so for all men one by one. After all, what does it matter to those who worship the gods under Romulus and are now long dead that the Roman Empire increased so greatly after their death? They are now pleading their causes before the gods of the underworld. Whether those causes are good or bad is not pertinent to our present argument. This remark applies even to those who, in the few days of their life, have passed swiftly and with haste through the imperial office itself, bearing with them the heavy burdens of their own deeds. Although the office itself has endured throughout long ages of time, as one generation of mortals has died and been succeeded by another. If, however, even those benefits which endure only for the shortest time are to be attributed to the gods, then those gladiators must have received considerable help. They burst the bonds of their servile condition, they fled, they escaped. They assembled a great and most powerful army, obedient to the counsel and commands of their kings, and much feared by the proud might of Rome. Remaining unsubdued by several Roman generals, they seized much plunder, gained many victories, enjoyed whatever pleasures they wished, and did what their lust suggested, until they were finally conquered, a feat achieved only with the greatest difficulty. They lived sublime and enthroned. Let us, however, come to weightier matters. Chapter 6. Of the greed of King Ninus, who was the first to make war on his neighbors in order to rule more widely. Justinius, who followed Trogus Pompeius in writing Greek, or rather foreign, history not only in Latin, as Trogus did, but also with brevity, and commences his first book as follows, quote, "At the beginning of the affairs of tribes and nations, power was in the hands of kings. We were raised to the pinnacle of their majesty, who were raised, not we, who were raised to the pinnacle of their majesty, not by wooing the people, but by the knowledge that good men had of their moderation. The people were not bound by any laws. It was the custom rather to defend than extend the boundaries of empire, and the sway of each king was confined to his own fatherland. Ninus, king of the Assyrians, was the first of all those who changed the ancient, as it were, ancestral customs of the nations through a new greed for empire. He first made war on his neighbors and extended his conquest as far as the borders of Libya over peoples as yet untrained in the art of resistance." Unquote. And a little later he says, Ninus confirmed the greatness of the dominion he had won by constantly adding new possessions to it. When he had conquered his neighbors, therefore, he progressed to others, strengthened by the ascension of new forces, and since each victory became the instrument by which the next was won, he subjugated all the peoples of the East. Now, whatever may be the fidelity of the accounts written by Justinius or Trogus, for other more faithful accounts show that they are unreliable in certain respects. It is nonetheless an established fact among other writers that the kingdom of the Assyrians were spread far and wide by King Ninus. And so long did it endure that the Roman Empire has not yet achieved the same age. For as those persons who study the chronology of history have written, this kingdom endured for 1,240 years, from the first year in which Ninus began to reign until it was transferred to the Medes. But to wage war against neighbors and to go on from there against others, crushing and subjugating peoples who have done no harm out of the mere desire to rule. What else is this to be called than robbery? Chapter 7. Whether earthly kingdoms are either aided or hindered in their rise and fall by the gods. If the kingdom of Ninus became so great and endured for so long without the help of the gods, why is the ample territory and long duration of the Roman Empire attributed to the gods? Whatever is the cause of the one is surely also the cause of the other. But if our adversaries contend that the success of Ninus is indeed to be attributed to the help of the gods, I ask, of whose gods? For the other nations which Ninus conquered and subdued did not worship any gods different from those of the Assyrians. Alternatively, if the Assyrians did have gods of their own who were, as it were, craftsmen, more highly skilled in the art of building and maintaining an empire, were these dead then when in their turn the Assyrians lost their empire? Or did they prefer to go over to the Medes because their wages were not paid or because higher wages were offered? And then to the Persians when Cyrus invited them and made them a still better offer? This last nation, indeed, since the time of the very extensive but exceedingly short-lived kingdom of Alexander of Macedon, has maintained its sway down to the present day over considerable territories in the East. If this is so, then the gods have been faithless in deserting their own people and going over to the enemy. But this is a thing that even a man, Camillus, did not do. For after he had defeated and subdued a most hostile city, he tasted the ingratitude of Rome, on whose behalf he had conquered. Yet he later forgot the injury, and mindful of his native land, rescued it a second time from the Gauls. Or perhaps the gods are not as mighty as gods ought to be, and can be overthrown by human counsel or strength. Alternatively, if, when they wage war, the gods are not defeated by men, but by other gods who are the special gods of certain cities, then they have enemies among themselves. I say that word. Enmities amongst themselves, which take which each takes up on behalf of his own faction. The city of Rome ought not, then, to have worshipped its own gods more than the others from whom its own gods might, after all, have received aid. We do not, of course, know whether this charge of partiality or flight or migration or desertion in battle on the part of the gods is true or not. It is true, however, that when these kingdoms were lost and transferred through great disasters in war, the name of Christ had not yet been proclaimed in those times and on those parts of the earth. If, when their kingdom was taken away from the Assyrians after more than 1,200 years, the Christian religion had already proclaimed another eternal kingdom there and had forbidden the sacrilegious worship of false gods, what would the foolish men of that nation have said? No doubt they would have said that a kingdom which had been preserved for so long could not have perished for any other reason than the desertion of its own religion and the reception of Christianity. In that foolish charge, which might well have been brought, then let our adversaries see themselves in a mirror, and if there is any shame in them, let them blush to bring a similar charge of their own. The Roman Empire, however, is only afflicted, not transformed. The same thing has befallen it in other times before the name of Christ was proclaimed. Yet it was recovered after such affliction. Such a recovery is not, indeed, to be despaired of even now, for who knows the will of God in such cases? Chapter 8. By the help of which of the gods could the Romans suppose that their empire was extended and preserved, when they believed that even the care of single things was hardly to be entrusted to any one God, small g? Let us next ask, if you please, which god or gods out of the great swarm that the Romans worshipped did most to extend and preserve their empire? Surely they did not dare to attribute any part of a task so glorious and so full of the highest dignity to Cloacina or to Vulpia, who derives her name from voluptuousness, or to Lubentina, whose name comes from lust, libido, or to Vaticanus, who presides over the whales, Vaticus of infants, vagina. I think that's vaginatus. Okay. Or to Cunea, who looks after their cradles, Cune. But how is it possible to mention all the names of the gods and goddesses in one part of this book? For the Romans themselves were scarcely able to contain them all in the great tomes in which they assigned to each divine being a particular sphere of activity. They did not think it proper to entrust their land to any one god. Rather, they entrusted the countryside to Rus, which is Rusnia, the mountain terraces to the god Jugatinus, hills, Colis, to the goddess Colatina, and over the valleys they set up Valania. Nor could they even find one Sagitia to whom to commend the general care of cornfields. Rather, for as long as the seed corn, Sata, was under the ground, they chose to have the goddess Sia set over it. Then, when it was above the ground and ripening, the goddess Sectia assumed responsibility. And when the grain was harvested and stored, the goddess Tatilina was invoked to keep it safely. Who would not have thought a single goddess, Sagitia, equal to the task of watching over the corn all the way from its grassy beginnings to the ripe ears? But one was not enough for men who so loved a multitude of gods that each wretched soul, scorning the chaste embrace of the one true God, prostituted himself to a horde of demons. Thus they set Proserpine over the germinating seeds, the god Notitus over the joints and nodes of the stems, and the goddess Volantina over the sheaths of the ears. Then the sheaths opened, and the goddess Patalena took charge of them, so that the ears might emerge. When the corn stood level in the field with new ears, this was attributed to the goddess Hastalina, so called because the ancients used the term hastair to mean to make level. When the corn was in flower, the goddess Flora presided. When it was milky, the god Lacturnus. When it ripened, the goddess Matuta. And when the weeds were cleared, that is, removed from the field, the goddess Runsania. I do not mention them all, for though our adversaries are not abashed by all this, it bores me. I have, however, said these few things in order to make it understood that the Romans certainly do not venture to assert that it was these deities who established, increased, and preserved their empire. For each of these deities was so busy with his own duties that no one thing was ascribed as a whole to any one of them. How could Sagitia care for the empire when she was not allowed to take care of the corn and the trees at the same time? How could Cuania think of arms when she was not permitted to go beyond the care of the little ones? How could Notatus help in war when he was concerned not even with the sheath of the ears, but only with the nodes of the joints? Everyone has a single doorkeeper for his house, and because this doorkeeper is a man, he is quite sufficient. But the Romans have set three gods there: Forculus for the doors, Cardia for the hinges, and Limentinus for the threshold. Forculus then was not able to guard the door, hinges, and threshold all at once. Chapter 9. Whether the extent and duration of the Roman Empire should have been ascribed to Jupiter, who is considered by his worshippers to be the highest god. Omitting, therefore, or for the time being leaving aside, this swarm of gods, we must next inquire as to the part played by the greater gods in making Rome great enough to rule for so long over so many nations. No doubt, then, this was the work of Jupiter, for it is, excuse me, for he it is whom they wish to call the king of all the gods and goddesses. This is shown by his scepter and by the Capitol on its high hill. The Romans published a saying concerning this god, which, though that of a poet, is nonetheless most apt. All things are full of Jupiter. Varro believes that he is worshipped, though called by another name, even by those who worship one God only, without an image. If this is so, however, why has he been treated so insultingly at Rome, and among other peoples also, by having an image erected to him? This fact displeased Varro so much that, though he was himself enthralled to the perverse customs of so great a city, he did not in the least hesitate to say and write that those who had set up images for the people had both diminished reverence and increased error. Chapter 10. What opinions were followed by those who set different gods over different parts of the world? Moreover, why is a wife, Juno, joined to him and called sister and spouse? Because our adversaries say we have Jupiter in the ether and Juno in the air. These two elements are conjoined. Isn't that something? They have ether back there, and people deny that ether is even an element. Amazing. Just had to interject there. And these two elements are conjoined, the one being higher and the other lower. It is not he, then, of whom it is said, all things are full of Jupiter, if Juno also fills some part of things? Or do both of them fill both regions, with husband and wife in both of these elements, and in each of them at the same time? Why, then, is the aether or ether given to Jupiter and the air to Juno? Besides, these two divine beings should have been enough. Why is it that the sea is assigned to Neptune and the earth to Pluto? Moreover, in order that these also should not remain without wives, Salacia is added to Neptune and Proserpine to Pluto. For they say, just as Juno holds the lower part of the heavens, that is the air, so Salisa possesses the lower part of the sea, and Proserpine the lower part of the earth. Our adversaries seek a way to patch up their fables, but they do not find one. For if these fables were true, their ancient writers would have said that there are three elements of the universe rather than four. In this way, each of these three pairs of gods would have in their own particular element allotted to it. As it is, however, such writers have affirmed beyond any doubt that the aether is one thing and the air another. But water, whether higher or lower, is still water. Or even supposing that there is a difference between higher and lower water, it is still so great that the water ceases to be. Is it so great that the water ceases to be water? And what can the lower part of the earth be made of except earth, no matter how great the difference by which it is distinguished from the higher part? So then, behold, the entire corporal world is complete in these four or three elements. Where will Minerva be then? What element will she occupy? What will she fill? For she was placed in the capital at the same time as Jupiter and Juno, although she is not the daughter of both of them. Or if they say that Minerva occupies the upper part of the ether, and that this is why the poets have concocted the tale that she was born from the head of Jupiter, why then is it not she rather than Juno who is considered to be the queen of the gods, since she is higher than Jupiter? Is it perhaps because it was thought wrong to place the daughter above the father? Why, therefore, was this rule of justice not observed in the case of Jupiter himself in relation to Saturn? Is it because the latter was vanquished? Did they fight then? Certainly not, say our adversaries. Such nonsense belongs only to fables. So be it. Let us not believe fables. Let us believe better things of the gods. But why, in that case, did the Romans not assign the father of Jupiter a place of honor, at least equal to, if not higher than, that of his son? Because they say Saturn is the duration of time. Those who worship Saturn therefore worship time. And it is suggested that Jupiter, king of the gods, was born of time. Why, after all, is it improper to say that Jupiter and Juno are born of time if he is the heavens and she is the earth? For heaven and earth were certainly created. Indeed, the Romans learned and wise men say as much in their books. For that saying of Virgil does not come from poetic fancy, but from the book of the philosophers. Then Ether, the Father Almighty, in fecund showers descended into the lap of his joyful spouse, that is, into the lap of Tellus, or Terra, like land, Terra. Although, hold on, here again, they will have it that there are certain differences, and they consider that in the earth itself, Terra is one thing, Tellus another, and Telemu yet another, and they depict all these gods as being called by their own names, distinguished by their own offices, and venerated at their own altars with their own rites. This same earth they also call the mother of the gods, as if the inventions of the poets might be more tolerable if, according to their books, not of poetry, but of sacred lore, Juno is not only the sister and spouse, but also the mother of Jupiter. The same earth is Crius. The same, they wish to say, is also Vesta, while they assert even more frequently that Vesta is none other than the fire belonging to the hearth, without which the city could not exist. This is why it is the custom of virgins to serve her, because just as nothing is born of a virgin, so nothing is born of fire. It certainly was appropriate, though, that all this variety should have been abolished and extinguished by him who was born of a virgin. I love that. That's neat. For who can tolerate it while they attribute to such honor and, as it were, chastity to fire? Our adversaries, nonetheless, do not blush to say from time to time that Vesta is also Venus. Thus, the honor shown to virginity by the handmaidens of Vesta vanishes. For as Vesta is the same as Venus, how have virgins rightly served her by abstaining from the pursuits of Venus? Or are there two Venuses, one a virgin and the other a woman of experience? Or three indeed, one the goddess of virgins, who is also Vesta, who the goddess of wives, and one of harlots. To the last, indeed, the Phoenicians used to offer a gift by prostituting their daughters before marrying them to husbands. Which of these is the wife of Vulcan? Certainly not the virgin, since she has a husband, and let us not say that it is the harlot, lest we seem to do injury to the son of Juno and colleague of Minerva. It is understood, therefore, that Vulcan's wife is the Venus who belongs to married women, although we certainly do not wish them to imitate her in what she did with Mars. Again, they say, you revert to fables. But what kind of justice is it to reproach us for speaking thus of their gods, yet not to reproach themselves for taking such great pleasure in witnessing the crimes of those gods in the theaters? Moreover, those theatrical displays portraying the crimes of the gods were instituted in honor of those same gods. This would be unbelievable if it were not proven quite beyond doubt. Chapter 11. Of the many gods whom the more learned defend as being one and the same with Jupiter. Thus, let our adversaries make whatever assertions they please in their reasonings concerning the natural order. On one account, let Jupiter be the soul of this corporal world, who fills and moves that whole mass, which is built and compacted out of the four elements, or as many elements as they like. On another, let him grant parts of it to his sister and brothers. On another, again, let him be the ether, so that he may embrace Juno the air, spread out beneath him. Then again, let him be the whole heaven, including the air, and let him impregnate with fertile showers and seeds the earth, which is at one and the same time his wife and mother. For such a thing is not thought disgusting among the divine beings. Or again, not that it is necessary to dwell upon all the possibilities, let him be the one God of whom many think that the noblest of all the poets speak when he says, for God passes through all things, all lands, and the tracks of the sea, and the depths of the heavens. Let him be Jupiter in the ether, Juno in the air, Neptune in the sea, and also Cilicia in the lower parts of the sea. Let him be Pluto in the earth, Proserpine in the lower parts of the earth, Vesta in the domestic hearth, Vulcan in the blacksmith's forge, the sun and the moon and stars among the heavenly bodies, Apollo among the diviners, Mercury among the merchants. Let him be Janus, the opener, and Terminus, the closer. Let him be Saturn in time, Mars and Bellinona in war, Liber in the vineyards, Ceres in the cornfields, Diana in the forests, Minerva in learning. Finally, let him be the horde of the plebeian gods, so to speak, under the name of Liber. Let him preside over the seed of men, and as Liber over that of women. Let him be Dispater, who brings the newly born forth into the light of day. Let him be Mina, not him, but whom they set over the ministration of women. Lucina, who is invoked by women in childbirth. Let him bring help to the newly born by receiving them into the bosom of the earth, and in this capacity let him be called Ops. Let him open their mouths to wail and be called the god Vaticanus. Let him lift them up from the earth and be called the goddess Lavana. Let him protect their cradles and be called Cunia. Let it be none other than he who is made manifest in those goddesses who sing the fates of the newly born and are called Carmintes. Let him preside over fortunate events and be called Fortuna. Let him, as the goddess Rumina, bring milk out of the breast for the infant, because the ancients called the breast Ruma. As the goddess Potina, let him furnish drink. And as the goddess Etica, let him bring food. From the fear of infants, let him be called Pavenisha. From the coming of hope, Vanilla for pleasure, Volupia for action, Agonora. Oh, I think I said that I think I spoke that funny. Here we go. Let me do that again. Let him be called the goddess, up here, over here. From the coming of hope, Valia. From pleasure, which is voluptia. From action, Agonora. From the stimulants which excite a man to much action, let him be called the goddess Stimula. Let him be the goddess Sterna, from making men vigorous. Numera, from teaching to count. Chemia, from teaching to sing. Let him also be the god Kansas from bringing counsel, and the goddess Cynthia from inspiring opinions. Let him be the goddess Jovanitas, who, after the robe of boyhood is laid aside, takes charge of the beginning of manhood. And let him also be Fortuna Barbata, who provides adults with a beard. For some reason, the Romans refused to honor this deity by making it a male god called Barbatus, from Barba, as Nadas is so called with notice. I don't know. Since he has whiskers, they could at least have called him Fortunus and not Fortuna. As the god Jagatinus, let him yoke married couples together, and when the girdle of the virgin bride is unloosed, let him be invoked as the goddess what's that word? Virgininus. Let him be Mutinus or Tutinus, who is called Priapus by the Greeks. Let our adversaries If our adversaries are not ashamed, let the one God Jupiter be all these that I have named, and whatever others I have not named, for I have not thought it worthwhile to name them all. Let him be all of these gods and goddesses, or, as some say, let all these parts of him or powers of him, or be parts of him or powers of his. This is how matters seem to those who are pleased to think of him as the soul of the world, an opinion which is that of most supposedly great and learned men. But if all this is true, and this is a question which, for the time being, I do not consider, what would they lose if, with more prudent moderation, they are simply to worship the one God Jupiter? What part of him would be slighted if he himself were to be worshipped? If, however, they are afraid lest parts of him should be angry because overlooked or neglected, then is it not true, as they contend, that his whole life is that of a single living being which contains all the gods as powers or members or parts of itself? Rather, one part can be angered more than another, and if one is placated, with another is enraged, then each has its own distinct from the rest. If it is said that all of them together, that is, the whole of Jupiter himself, could be offended if his parts were not worshipped singly and individually, this is a foolish assertion. For surely none of them could be overlooked if he, who has them all, were worshipped. Leaving aside the other assertions of their adversaries, which are innumerable, they say that all the stars are parts of Jupiter, and that all of them are alive and have rational souls, and therefore are indisputably gods. They do not see how many of them they neglect to worship, or for how many of them they do not build temples or establish altars, or to how very few of the stars they have thought of establishing such things and offering individual sacrifices. If, therefore, those stars who are not worshipped individually are angered, do our adversaries not fear to live with a few placated and the whole sky angry? If, however, they are worshipping all the stars because they worship Jupiter, in whom all the stars are contained, they could simply, by this compedious method, make supplication to all the gods in him alone. By this means, they would anger none of them, because in that one act, none would be slighted. By worshipping a few, on the other hand, they would furnish just cause for anger to the much greater number left aside, especially with Priapus. Priapus, distended in his gross nakedness, is preferred to them as they shine forth from their supernal abode. Wow, that's a lot. One more chapter and then we're done. Chapter 12. Of the opinion of those who have supposed God to be the soul of the world and the world to be the body of God. What? Men of intelligence, or indeed men of any kind whatsoever, for no outstanding capacity is required here, should surely be prompted by all this to put aside their zeal for contention and consider the following question. Some say that God is the soul of the world, and that the world is the body of that soul, so that the whole is one living being consisting of soul and body. They say also that this God is a kind of bosom or nature containing all things in himself, so that from his soul, by which the whole mass of the world is quickened, the lives and souls of all living things are derived, each according to the manner of its birth. On this view, then, nothing at all remains which is not a part of God. If all this is so, however, who does not see what impious and irreligious consequences follow? Whenever anyone tramples on something, he tramples on a part of God. Whenever any animal is killed, a part of God is slaughtered. And I decline to speak of all those things which may occur to anyone who gives the matter some thought, but which cannot be named without shame. Oh, yeah. All right. And I'm going to end that there, guys. I will pick up next time in chapter 3. So until then, keep your eyes on Jesus and your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And let us embed the Word of God upon the tablets of our hearts, so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. You have a great night.